Okay, so the Zoom lesson for Tuesday, we're talking about how you can write and solve proportions, and you can use those to solve problems in real life. So, first, we're going to just kind of go back to review a little bit before we get into this. And you should have this on the right hand side of your notebook. And then on the left hand side of your notebook, we're just going to review a couple things. So, if you'll remember from a couple weeks back, if we had two ratios and we were trying to figure out whether those ratios formed a proportion or not, we could cross multiply and do 1 times 10 to get 10, and 2 times 5 to get 10. And if those numbers matched, we said that those two ratios were proportional, and we said that yes, they were proportional, so they were equivalent, they were equal. Well, today we're going to be talking about how there's this missing piece that we don't know, and what we want to do is we want to cross multiply and get an equation that we can solve to get a missing number, so that when we cross multiply, we will get a yes. So that's our goal, is always to be able to cross multiply and get two numbers that are the same. So I'm going to work through this as a cross multiplication problem to kind of show you. We have 3 over 2, and that's going to be equal to some number over 8. So to solve for the x, to figure out what number that's going to be, we cross multiply. We do the 8 times 3, and 8 times 3 is 24. And then we multiply 2 times x. Well, 2 times x is 2x. And those two things have to be equal if they're a proportion. They both have to equal 24. So what we want to do is split that equation. And if you'll remember from a few weeks ago, if you have 2 times x and you're trying to figure out what that x is equal to, you have to divide by 2 on both sides of that equation. 24 divided by 2 is 12. And then we have our equal sign, and 2 divided by 2 is 1x. So our x is equal to 12, which means if I put my 12 here where the x is supposed to be, when I multiply 2 times 12, that's going to be 24, which is the same as 3 times 8, which is 24. Which makes that a proportion if both of those things equal 24. So my x has to be 12 to make that proportion true. Another way to solve this particular one is, what do I multiply 2 by to get 8? And I could multiply times 4, or I could do 3 times 4. That would give me the 12. So that works sometimes, but the cross multiplication always works. So that's the one that we're going to focus on today. So on your left-hand side of your page, if you would go ahead and write the problem, 8 over 20, and that's going to equal 6 over n. So we want to figure out what number goes in the place of that n. To do that, we cross multiply. So we do 8 times n. Well, 8 times n is 8n. That's what that means, 8 times n. And then on this side, we do 20 times 6. That's 120. And remember that those two things have to be equal if we have a proportion. So I have to multiply 8 times something to get 120. And if you don't know what that is, we go ahead and split that equation. The opposite of multiplying by 8 is dividing by 8. If you divide 8 divided by 8, that leaves you with just one n. And 120 divided by 8 will give you 15. So my n has to equal 15. And that's because if I have 8 over 20 and I have 6 over 15, because we said n was equal to 15, when I cross multiply, 20 times 6 is 120, and 15 times 8 is 120. So those two things are equal if n is equal to 15. We're going to do one more of those. So we've got 48. I'm going to write that down here a little further. 48 over 16, and that equals 6 over j. So you can cross multiply where you have 16 times 6, and that equals 96. And 48 times j is 48j. And those two things have to be equal. If they're a proportion, they have to be equal. So we split that equation. To get 1j, you have to divide by 48 on both sides of the equation. 48 divided by 48 is 1j, and 96 divided by 48 is 2, which means if my j is 2, then 2 times 48 is 96, and 16 times 6 is 96. So I'm just trying to figure out the number that makes that proportion true. Well, you can also figure out from a table what number. So we've got this black bean soup recipe, and it requires 1.5 cups of black beans and some salsa and water, 1 tomato, and 2 teaspoons of seasoning. So in the original recipe, we have 1.5 cups of black beans, and we have 1 tomato. A chef wants to increase the ingredients in a recipe to make a proportional recipe. So he wants it to taste the same, he just wants more. So instead of using 1.5 cups of black beans, he's going to put 6 cups of black beans. But in order for it to taste the same, he can't just put in 1 tomato. So we're trying to figure out how many tomatoes he needs in that recipe to make it taste the same. So we're just going to set up a proportion. So we have 1.5 cups of black beans for 1 cup of tomatoes. And then on this side, we have 6 cups of black beans. And we don't know how many tomatoes. So we're going to cross multiply. 1.5 times x is 1.5x. And 1 times 6 is 6. Those two things have to be equal. So I'm going to rewrite this down here. So we have 1.5x, and that has to equal 6. So I want to know, what number do I multiply 1.5 by to get 6? Well, if you don't know that, in order to figure it out, you have to divide by 1.5. So divide both sides of the equation by 1.5. So 1.5 divided by 1.5 just leaves you with x, 1x. And 6 divided by 1.5 is going to be 4. So I have to have 4 tomatoes in my recipe to make it taste the same. And then I know that that's right because if I do 1.5 over 1 and I do 6 over 4 tomatoes, 4 times 1.5 is 6, and 6 times 1 is 6. And when those are equal, that means that my proportion is correct, and that 4 would be what I need. Okay, then we've got 2 ringtones is equal to $6, and 3 ringtones is equal to X dollars. So you used to have to pay for ringtones on your phone. So you just set up a proportion where you have 2 ringtones is $6, and 3 ringtones is X. We cross multiply. X times 2 is 2x, and 6 times 3 is 18. So 2x is equal to 18. So 2 times some number is equal to 18. If you don't know what that number is, you split your equation. You divide by what's with the x, so we're dividing by 2. 2 divided by 2 leaves you with just 1x, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. So for 3 ringtones, it would cost $9. And we know that that's right because if we do 2 over 6 and 3 over 9, when I cross multiply, 9 times 2 is 18, and 6 times 3 is 18, which means 9 is the correct answer for X. Then we've got 3x over 10 is equal to 9 over 4. So we've got 3x over 10 equals 9 over 4. So we cross multiply. We do 4 times 3 x's. Well, 4 times 3 is 12x. And then 10 times 9 is 90. So 12 times some number that we don't know has to equal 90 to make those two things proportional. Well, if you don't know what that is, you divide by what's with the x. You divide by what's with the x. 12 divided by 12 leaves you with just 1x. And 90 divided by 12 is 7.5. So if we do x is equal to 7.5, then that means you would do 3 times 7.5. And if you do 3 times 7.5, you get, let me grab my calculator real quick. 7.5 times 3 is equal to 22.5. And then if we multiply that by 4, that equals 90. So when you multiply 3 times 7.5 times 4, when you multiply all 3 of those numbers together, you get 90, and 10 times 9 is 90. So our x is equal to 7. All right, we've got 5x over 3, and that equals 80 over 12. So we cross multiply, and we have 12 times 5 is 60.